voted Democrat because I'm a good person and I use my brain and I'm not insane and I actually go by the science. There is nothing wrong with me. There is everything wrong with you. If you all want equal rights, you better vote blue.
An American comedian there quite accurately lampooning supposed, quote, punk bands like Green Day and how they try to be edgy but in reality parrot all of the talking points and views of the liberal establishment. Now, given the title of this video, let me be clear that I'm not stating there aren't any talented musicians out there at all in this day and age. It's just the harsh reality is these people don't tend to get promoted or have any airplay. And if we look at decades gone by, we will see that there are a host of musicians, whether you agree with their politics or not, who were no doubt innovative both musically and lyrically. You know, Bob Dylan, Bob Marley, Jimi Hendrix, The Doors, The Beatles, The Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, David Bowie, Pink Floyd, The Sex Pistols, Joy Division, The Smiths. The list is endless, really. Yet in this day and age, while a song can be catchy, they tend to lack any real artistic weight. In fact, most things sound very similar. They often rely on excessive sexualization to market the singles and records, and the, quote, artists all seem to have the same cookie-cutter opinions about everything. I mentioned the Smiths earlier, and lead singer Morrissey has a few thoughts on this matter.
Now they talk all about, we must have diversity, which is diversity of people that you don't know, and it just means, it's just another word for conformity. It's the new way of saying conformity, diversity. You don't see anything diverse anywhere. No. It's all conformity.
Now, whether you like or loathe Morrissey, it's always seemed to me, despite his Irish roots, that he's always had a very good intuitive touch for English identity, for the English soul. Now, it's because of Morrissey's instincts I think he's catching on to something I speak a lot about on this channel, and that's that the core of England, our culture, our identity, has really been sold out to the global liberalist market. This is why the mainstream bangs on about diversity all the time today. The best thing you can be in this era is tolerant and inclusive. Of course, it's not really about diversity at all. It's about everybody and everything aligning itself with the economic wants and needs and the social demands of the globalist liberal order. Now, as I've said before, real diversity is England being English, Scotland being Scottish, Japan being Japanese, and Saudi Arabia being Arabian. If everybody has migrated into differing countries, then there is no diversity anymore by definition. But this is exactly what the liberal system wants, really. A simple way to understand this is how our liberal world treats religions, or at least the acceptable side of religions. They'll accept Buddhism because it's tolerant and passive. They'll accept Christ because he's a desert-wandering hippie who's a proto-gay activist. They'll accept Islam because it's feminist and diverse, don't you know? Now, of course, none of this is true. It just shows how cultures, religions and peoples have to be manipulated and bent into the shape of the liberal demands of the era. Now, this leads us to our first indication regarding what's happened to music. The reality is that really challenging and talented musicians just wouldn't get picked up today by record labels. This is because they wouldn't be parroting the values and norms of the age. That would be, of course, a challenge to the power structure, but secondly, it might interrupt the smooth flow of finances coming in. This is something rock musician Frank Zappa remarked on as far back as the 1980s.
You remember the 60s, that era that a lot of people, have these glorious memories of, which they really weren't that great those years. But one thing that did happen during the 60s was some music of an unusual or experimental nature did get recorded and did get released. Now look at who the executives were in those companies at those times. Not hip young guys. These were cigar-chomping old guys who looked at the product that came and said, I don't know. Who knows what it is? Record it, stick it out. If it sells, all right. We were better off with those guys than we are now with the supposedly hip young executives, who are making the decisions of what people should see and hear in the marketplace. The young guys are more conservative and more dangerous to the art form than the old guys with the cigars ever were.
What we can learn from Zappa isn't just a shift in the musical output, but also a change in the market men's mentality as well. Back in the day, the idea was just stack it high and sell it. If it sells, great. If it doesn't, it's a flop. Nowadays, market men can't take that risk. They simply must guarantee a return on any investment. What this means is that record labels these days follow a formulaic structure in order to peddle records to young people that are guaranteed to sell. Now, the way that they did this was actually quite clever. For example, let's look at the band Nirvana. Now, in the early 90s, Nirvana were genuinely quite challenging to the mainstream social order. They were promoting a view of nihilism, pro-feminism, pro-trans, all that sort of stuff that's everywhere today. Now, the market men must have noticed that this stuff sells, and it sells big. So in essence, they integrated those left-wing social politics into their own market mechanism as a safe way to make record sales. And this is where we are today. Every mainstream musician has to have those liberal views in order to be accepted. The record companies will take care of the marketing manipulation to children, telling them it's edgy and rebellious to imbibe Miley Cyrus or Rage Against the Machine. When you have such autocratic control over a culture's art, what does this do to people? Well, I think it makes us zombified in many senses, and it makes us hyper-materialistic too. I think this also goes some way in explaining the popularity of rap music. Now, I know there's going to be someone out there who says, Tupac Shakur's got some good records, or Illmatic is an all-time classic album. I'm sure there are some great rap records out there, but generally speaking, rap is a highly degenerate art form, and it's odd how the feminists don't really get on the back of it. And I think the prevalence of rap tells us something very important about our culture today. First of all, I think it's promoted by the mainstream because it has a focus on sex, cars, women, and money. The material culture. That's obviously going to keep business booming. Another reason is it tends to be a field that blacks excel in, and as we know, in our modern diverse world, we must always celebrate black achievement. I think they are genuinely talented when it comes to pop music. And finally, and I think this is the most important one, in the era of supposed white straight male domination, blackness is allowed to be masculine in the same way that Islam is allowed to be masculine because they're, quote, diverse. I think this goes some way in explaining why rap music is so popular with young men today. It's because it's one arena where an edgy form of masculinity is allowed, even if it's an unhealthy one. After all, the mainstream Western world demeans masculinity at every turn. The best thing that you can be in the eyes of the liberal world is some eunuch second-hand TV presenter to the strong independent woman. What this means is that many young men across the Western world crave the validation and approval of young black men. That makes them cool. I think this explains in large part the success of Eminem. Now, I have noticed before that some people, especially middle-class whites, get very upset when you critique Eminem, but we're going to go there. Of course, again, he is a talented guy. You can tell he's very good with his wordplay. Some of his early critiques on the hypocrisy of America were very good. But despite the talent he has, I just have never seen why he's treated like a demigod. Half the time he's a complete degenerate, whether it's skits about killing his girlfriend, saying the most disgusting things you've ever heard on a record, or even just looking at the camera like he's in a boy band with that tough guy look. Now, to put my Carl Jung hat on, I personally believe he's not just popular because of his music, but because he represents something to the white Western youth, and that is a form of masculinity that's accepted by black people that's outside of the typical mainstream lame white middle class dad, as well as the historic view of the white oppressor. Now, this is why, post-Eminem, every teeny bopper pop star, whether male or female, must always be twinned with a black rapper early on in their career to give them that credibility and approvability. On your screen is Justin Bieber in his teeny bopper days singing one of these From the Start You Had My Heart type songs, and for some reason there's a gangster rapper. I mean, this clearly isn't for artistic value. Yet with a figure like Justin Bieber, we can see how record labels manufacture a pop star. He's accepted by black people, he has all the correct socially liberal opinions, and on top of that he promotes the same materialism that keeps the system ticking over. After that, it's relatively simple for the market men to make him desirable to young girls. He can be photographed outside a nightclub with a couple of rappers to be a bit edgy, and bang, you got a heartthrob. Although personally I've never quite understood why he's such a heartthrob. Every photo I see of him, he always looks dirty to me, like he needs a good scrub in the bath. But then I suppose his target audience isn't exactly 38-year-old straight married men who have conservative moral opinions about things. But anyway, the core point here is it's a real shame that music has been lost from its true form. That's supposed to be freer artistic expression that can even influence and mould the culture in real time. It can even offer a path to spiritual transcendence in a very material age. Yeah, despite my conservative leanings, I've always sympathised with those clips you get from the late 80s and early 90s of the acid house raves. It features some people out in the middle of nowhere in some hangar, probably on ecstasy, dancing the night away. I'm sure some of them are causing trouble, but in essence I do understand it as a desire from deep in the human soul to be outside of the grinding mechanism of modernity that wants to control what you listen to, what you think, what you say, what you feel spiritually, unless it can be morphed into the interests of the market. In this day and age, such raves have been taken over by corporations like Carling, and when it comes to supposed rebellious music, it's all just pure Guardian Easter ideology. Take folk punk icon Billy Bragg, you know exactly what he's going to say before he opens his mouth. It's all just cookie-cutter liberalism that you get from Justin Bieber or Miley Cyrus. Now, because we're living in an era of cultural decay, there's lots of nostalgia going around. You still have boomers paying hundreds of pounds to go and watch the Rolling Stones at Wembley Stadium. Oasis are coming back, which is somewhat ironic because in many ways they're a nostalgia-based band for the 60s anyway, and now we've got nostalgia for them coming back because they were around in the 90s. One interesting recent example, though, was the folk musician Anthony Oliver. He seemed to come out of nowhere and break the mould, singing a populist tune about rich men north of Richmond. However, he was arguably quickly repackaged into the interests of liberalism and sold back at us. But it does go to show there could be a future interest in folk music in an era of broken identities where people are seeking their roots. Of course, the British Isles has a famous history of folk music, which is largely forgotten. We'll just have to be careful the mainstream doesn't repackage that and try and sell it back to us. However, we're never really going to be able to control the mainstream, but I do think there's an argument to try and support up-and-coming artists, especially those who speak about real things, if only it's in a small communitarian way. Of course, it's very much my mission to promote spiritual and personal transformation, both on the new channel and the Substack. Do check those out down below if you're interested. Other than that, do let me know your thoughts about all this and do consider subscribing to the channel if you're new.